Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Feyrie Southeast, and this is the first episode of Sculpting with Feyrie. So, as many of you know, about 5 years ago this October, I had a baby. And that was a great thing. He's the love of my life. But the one sad thing was I had just started really taking off with my polymer clay sculpting, mainly of dolls, like fairy dolls, kind of dark crystallish labyrinth looking stuff. And if you know anything about sculpting in polymer clay is like a sponge for every little piece of dust that there is. So this face was one of the last things I sculpted before I realized that the level of cleanliness and dust-free perfection that I had to maintain as a polymer clay sculptor was not compatible with having a newborn or a toddler. You just couldn't. So I packed up most of my things, and I was a little heartbroken, but I knew the time would come again when he was just old enough and I would have my own area once more to have a studio in, and I would once again get to sculpt. So it's that time. This was one of the last things I did, and the working title of this little sculpture is The Beautiful Head. I feel like of all the heads I've ever done, this was this so far is the most beautiful. Or would have been. This head has not been baked yet. So this is raw polymer clay that has been sitting here for about 5 years now. Most of the time I think it was in a closed box, but as you can see, not the whole time. And at first I really took a lot of care to make sure that this face did not get anything in it in terms of dust. The problem was out of sight, out of mind, especially if you have ADHD like I do. So I lost her for a long time, but then I found her again. And so I have this beautiful head, but here's the issue. A, she's covered in dust, dirt, lint, and every other thing you could think of. Okay, B, polymer clay, without going into a lot of the technical stuff of exactly what it's made out of. I should probably research that, honestly. I know it's made out of some kind of petroleum-based thing, which sounds terrible, but it's a great, what's it called? Material, I forget the word. Let's say material to work in. I wish, in a perfect world, I would work in all natural stuff, but I like the way that you can sculpt this. You get to see the end product basically as it would be before you bake it. Then you just put it in the oven for a few minutes and you're good. I do series baking, so usually I'll bake like the head, and then I'll make like the hands, and then I'll bake those, and then I'll do feet. And quite often I'm looking to see if I have an armature laying around. If it's a doll like the one you see up top there, if you look at that black and white tapestry right above that, there's a doll. I don't know how well you can see her, but she's an example of this. I do an armature, like a wire armature that's made out of this kind of wire. I make it so it can stand up on its own, and then I pad out the body, the areas that are going to be sculpted over or have like pieces inserted on. I leave so that I can make the head, and then I can put the head on the armature, and then the hands, and put the hands on the armature. It's just a lot easier that way. When I first started out, I made them all like in one piece, you know, like I was Michelangelo or something, and making a 3D sculpture. You know, where are the fairies when you need them? I usually have like 9 bajillion sculptures hanging around, but I don't have any at hand, which is odd. I cleaned up earlier. Every time I clean up, it's like I don't ever know where anything is. But the problem with it was, if I didn't get everything right, it's like trying to make a movie where you're trying to get a scene right in one take versus having like, let's say a 10-second shot here, 10-second shot here, 10-second shot here. It's just a lot easier to work with. So looping back around to what I was saying a minute ago, the longer polymer clay stays out, the more brittle it gets, and the more oils sort of leach from it over time. In order to get polymer clay to the point where you can work with it, it takes quite a long time to condition the clay. So to make this kind of Caucasian, very pale flesh tone, I combined a lot of different shades of super sculpting, I want to say. Hold on. No, I shouldn't say the wrong product. This Peep. No, actually, wait, is that it? No. It may be Fimo. So I want to say super sculpty, but I may have actually used Fimo. But I put them in the coffee grinder. I had my own little polymer clay coffee grinder. I think at one point I had a little tiny blender too that I got for like green stamps at Piggly Wiggly or something. It was one of those prizes where you get a tiny blender, and what is it going to be good for? It's good for being a polymer clay blender, because you don't want to get this near your food. Then I have to blend it up into little crumbs several times, and then I squish it together, and then where am I? Here it is. Then once I've done that a few times, I roll it out or make it into a ball, and then put it through a pasta machine to make it into flat sheets, and to combine it. And what this is doing is it's working the clay so the clay is malleable, but not too malleable, and it's getting the oil right in there. I really do need to look at some technical product knowledge so I can speak intelligently about this. I can speak intuitively and tell you I know when it feels right, but I can't really explain why you have to do all that to it. But after you've done that, all that to it, it's really a lovely thing to sculpt in. I sculpt using, I sculpted this, I think, mostly with wooden tools. My favorite tool is around here somewhere, but you know, I like made it its own little like Velcro area too, so I wouldn't lose it. And now, of course, it's fallen off. But this is very similar to what the tool looks like that I used to create it. I was just oiling these. The other thing about creating with polymer clay is that not only do you have to keep your area immaculate, you have to keep your tools immaculate, because it is very easy to, like for example, say I was making beads, or I was doing, when I did the Puler goblins, I might sculpt in dark green or red or something. And while I'm doing that, little tiny like micro pieces of red clay and green clay will get embedded in the handle. Like to the point where I know that looks obvious from there, but you can't really see it unless you're really being nitpicky. The problem is if I then use this tool on a different piece, especially if it was a super pale Caucasian tone like this, it would end up getting more crap and detritus in it. And not only does it look unsightly, I mean, I guess you could look at it and say, well, you could go ahead and bake it and you could say, tell some kind of story about why she has a skin texture like that. And quite often with the goblins, I do that. I will bake in the, you know, a little bit of the dirt and stuff. I won't be as picky with fingerprints and that sort of thing. But the problem is, if you don't condition the clay just so, and if during the entire time you're sculpting it, you don't have the oils just so, or you leach out too much oil, or you put too much oil in, because I can control the crap in here, the detritus, to some degree with rubbing alcohol and with baby oil. Now these two things are great for getting crap out of polymer clay before I bake it. The problem is you have to use them sparingly, because they do, when you use too much, they throw off the clay oil percentages or whatever. So if I put too much alcohol on it, it'll leach the clay of the oils and it will crack while it's baking. It'll crack in the oven. If I put too much of the baby oil in it, the clay will become so soft that it will lose its form. Like I'll lose all these nice areas where you see I've made the lips and I've made the nose, and now it's gotten squashed down, so I'm gonna have to repair all of this. You can see where I did the chin, but just having been handled and existing, you know, in the world, this poor beautiful head has gone through hell. So not only could I mess up the oils and cause it to crack while baking, based on like what I'm going to use to fix some of this like debris that's in it, okay? Just the process of time and the clay existing in reality for 5 years. You see how it has this crack in it? That's just because, you know, it may have, this part may have bent because it's not on the armature yet. When I put this on the armature, I have like a hollowed out little area here. The head has its own separate armature. It's like a foil ball. Sometimes I do it over styrofoam too. But anyway, so this will just screw on that wire thing I showed you. Like the neck will like have this, and down it will go, and it'll just pop on. But because it didn't have that, the top of the structure, the clay part, is softer than the middle. So at some point this bent and it broke, and it also had clay leaching out it, so it's brittle. And just in playing with it like that, like I've made it even worse. Anyway, so I'm going to be starting on the very delicate process of trying to fix beautiful head. I pray that I'm not going to have to start over from scratch, because she's just so beautiful. She's almost so beautiful it's to her own detriment, because if she had been less beautiful, I would have just been like, screw it, whatever, and like thrown it in the oven, and she would have been long made. But because she was so beautiful, I did not want to mess her up, and I wanted her to be perfect. I didn't bake her the night I made her, which was like if you want to learn any lesson from this video, learn that when you're sculpting in polymer clay, you need to bake in the session. When you do small pieces like this and you're doing series baking, you need to bake your work session that day after you've done it. Now, like that same day, especially if you have ADHD and you have like a kid and other stuff going on. When I look at these YouTube channels of people who are like professional animators, or they sculpt creatures so that animation companies can take pictures of it and then animate it. Now that would be a dream job for me. Somewhere in a parallel dimension where all my dreams got to come true, I am like one of those guys. Now they will sit there and they'll like cover the sculpture with saran wrap so that it doesn't get as much dust on it, and a lot of them will sculpt like through the saran wrap. I'm not going to be vulgar and tell you what that reminds me of, but I mean, that's a great idea. But anyway, they'll do that, and then they have such a controlled world and such a lack of other responsibilities that they're able to absolutely control their environment, where they can have their sculpture on like a Lazy Susan little turntable thing, and then when they're done for that part of the day, or that, like, say they make this great sculpture but it's not perfect yet, they want to work on the textures some more, they'll like cover it up, and then the next day they'll come and like the sculpture will still be there and no one will have moved it, and a toddler will not have like stolen it and like put it in the trunk of his tricycle, and like dust won't have blown all over it. And so they're able to then unwrap it and get to practice their enormous privilege of being able to like control their environment and what happens. But I don't have that. So lesson learned, if you're a mom or you have some other kind of like immense responsibility where the world doesn't conform to what you would like, to your wishes to placate you, and something else besides you is the center of the universe, like a kid, series baking, bake at the end of each session. So today, I guess my goal is to get as much of this detritus out as I can, fix the neck. I should probably fix the neck before I do the detritus, because I can always, go back and nitpick it. But I'm thinking, now that I mention it, I may go ahead and make the chest armature so that I can put a rod up in here. That way it's not going to bend again and get worse. So anyway, I kind of want to figure out how that I can just like record this and have it going in the background where I'm not necessarily narrating it, and maybe I can like put it in high speed later so you can watch like the speeded up fast motion version of me doing this, because this is going to be a long, slow process. What I'm doing right now to repair this crack, I'm getting like the camera angle so good. I don't know if you can see that really well. I can see it really well. I wish this thing could zoom. I don't think it does. But what I'm doing is going in. Actually, you know what? I'm impressed with how okay this clay is in terms of how it's responding to me right now, because it feels good. It feels like it's structurally sound, even though it has some flaws. But I'm like drawing lines from the bottom of the neck up here, and I'm kind of roughing up the surface. Not too much, because this is such a thin layer. And of course, oh Lord, I just thought of this. I don't know that I still have the rest of the skin tone that I made. I know at one point I did, and it may be somewhere in a storage unit, but I can't locate, because I'm like, okay, well, I can just put a little patch there after I rough it up, and then I can smooth it out, except I don't know where her little skin kit bag is. It's been 5 years. So we'll see what happens. It may, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I hope that she'll end up as beautiful as I would like her to be. Another thing that is a big possibility is that she's just going to have to be imperfect, and something in the process of challenges that I'm having to go through with this will actually having that boundary instead of just the infinite field of possibility and not having the medium, that's the word, do exactly what I want. Quite often that leads to really some interesting bit of creativity happening that ends up making the piece. Like I had one piece that I was doing a commission, actually for Diana, if you're watching this, Diana H. That way she knows who I'm talking about, but if she doesn't want to share her personal info, then she's still protected that way by just my saying age. But I did a commission piece for her, and it was this like fae, and she didn't know that I was going this elaborate with it, but she loves birds, and she has like a macaw, and so I wanted to incorporate that into the piece. So I sculpted this huge, like perfect macaw replica of her bird that she has, and the little fae was gonna ride it, like ride around on the bird. So then that got interesting, because I'm like, well, the fae doesn't have wings, it rides on a bird. Now how come? So I made this whole story about these bird riders, and they lived in the rainforest and this and that. Well, so when I was baking the fae and when I was baking the parrot, I did the first bake of the fae and the bake of the parrot at the same time, and I did not series bake the parrot. I just sculpted the whole thing. It was absolutely beautiful. I sculpted it in one piece, and then I baked it, and it burned. So this beautiful bird was burned. The fae itself burned, and I had done the arms such that I in my head I was going to attach hands later and feet, but I didn't really enable that structurally. So I ended up making this whole story, and it was very cool, because it was addressing things and her psychology and her journey as a person, but I was tying it in with where the story of how the parrot and the bird rider got burned, and it became a special part of the piece, and about who the fae was. They went through fire. It was really, really cool. So if that is what happens here, and I end up having to do something like the fae cracks or whatever, I'll make it part of the piece. I could almost see, that Japanese thing where they if something breaks, they put gold in it. I could go, if it ends up cracking, we could do something like that. So there is something to be said for when your medium does not do exactly what you want. And I think that is where that's where brilliance and the genius of art comes in. Not necessarily, I feel like if I was a true genius of art, I would, on one level, in an ideal world, I would have perfect control of my materials, right? Well, the reality is that, and this is sort of one of the philosophies of my Patreon. Like I always say I'm making bad art. That's because I need to give myself permission for it to be bad if it ends up bad. Because if I only accept perfect art, then I will never make anything. And to get good at art, you have to make a lot of bad art and a lot of mistakes to make before you can get to good art. But so this is sort of like turning that genius paradigm on its head, because it's its own form of genius, but it's a genius of not being a genius. It's a genius of learning to work with life when life doesn't do what you wanted it to, and learning how to like accept that and move on and make and find beauty in it. If you look at the 1942 version of Fantasia, to me that's one of the most amazing genius works of animation and of film ever made, versus the Fantasia 2000, which was all done like CGI, computer generated stuff. Now I'm not one of those people that throws off on computer generated art. That it is still absolutely art, but it gives the animator and the artist a degree of control and ease that they didn't have when they're doing this by hand. And when you compare those two movies, a lot of what made the first Fantasia so brilliant was that they were overcoming things. They were overcoming their limitations. Like quite often in the first Fantasia, they would imagine like music. They would visually depict what the music sounded like. I think that, and it didn't really do that in the Fantasia 2000, and I think part of it was because when working with a medium that you have more control over, you have a tendency to go for the realism or exact depiction of like the character, instead of like the abstract picture almost. Like there's a lot of shots in the first Fantasia where it will show like fairies sliding down leaves or like ice skating across frost. And so there will be a story element, but the art itself is like so abstracted, it becomes almost about making patterns or making pictures. Whereas the Fantasia 2000 is, I don't even remember. I remember I was horribly disappointed with it. I didn't like it. But as far as I can tell, and I may be wrong, I should probably rewatch it before I say this, but it seemed like all the soul was gone out of it, because all it did was they came up with like, X number of concepts for the different musics, and then they just made the concept happen like they had pre-imagined it. I like art when I like what happens when you're not able to pre-imagine it so much. I like it when you say, okay, well, I want to make a fairy. Well, what kind of fairy? Well, I don't know. Let's see what comes out. I want to make the most beautiful fairy ever. Okay, well, I'll try that, but, reality might not back me up there. So, I guess that's sort of a long way of saying, even though this was so beautiful and I wanted it to be a certain way, like I bow to the clay and I bow to the process of not being always in control. I'm in control to an extent, but I'm not completely in control of the medium, especially after 5 years with all the the stress this little piece has gone through. And see, I'm already dealing with, like, when I put oil on it, it started to lose its structure, and when I put alcohol on it, it leached the clay. So we'll see what happens.